Just looking at my notes sometimes, sleep crutches. Let's talk about sleep crutches because that is usually one of our main reasons we have to figure out before we actually dive into sleep training. So, a sleep crutch can be anything your child relies on, which is breastfeeding to sleep, rocking to sleep, patting to sleep, swinging them to sleep, holding them to sleep, bottle feeding to sleep. It doesn't need to be much. Even the smallest little things can lead to an expectation, and that expectation usually fully kicks into gears past the 4 month regression. And I usually say it's not a bad thing because now go back to newborns. Newborns cannot self regulate, they need our help to co regulate, which means it's normal that most kids, and that's why you guys are here, struggle with sleep. My kids did too. Even Josie did. She got a passy in the NICU, and guess what I had to do? Wean her off the pacifier because she wanted me to play the pacifier game, especially between 3 and 6 a.m. in the morning. So, if you have a child that struggles with sleep, think about what are you doing to help them to get to sleep. And usually what happens is they go to sleep easier at bedtime. And then the more the night progresses, after 12 to 2 a.m., you kind of see things getting a little worse and worse and a little bit more intense, right? So usually what happens is, let's say you breastfeed your baby to sleep. Very common. Most of us do it, especially for exclusive breastfeeders. So usually what happens is baby has a lot of melatonin sleep pressure in their system, right? Because the peak between 7 and 8 p.m. happens, super tired and exhausted. You breastfeed baby to sleep, you successfully transfer them. Maybe you have to do a little bit of like touching, rubbing, so they finally stay down. And then you might get a little bit of a longer stretch. You might not. That also depends on like how much daytime sleep that they get. Are they currently in a big developmental growth spurt? It depends on so many different factors. Why some kids give you maybe just two big wake ups, and some kids give you 6 to 8 wake ups. So it depends on a lot of factors. But let's say baby goes down, and then after 12 to 2, you see they want to be more and more back on the breast. It's so hard for them to settle back. And then usually what happens is moms question themselves, are they maybe hungry? Did I ruin their sleep, their healthy sleep foundations? What is actually happening? Go back to them going down to sleep. So when you put them down at bedtime, go back and be your baby, right? So you have been nursing them to sleep for a long time, right? And even if it's just like 2, 3 weeks, they get used to it quickly, especially past 4 months, because it usually helps them to soothe them to sleep. So what they do is every time they have an issue connecting sleep cycles at night, they obviously want the same help back to sleep. And it doesn't matter if you breastfeed to sleep, if you rock, pad, whatever that is, they usually need that same help back to sleep. And that's normal. It's not to torture us moms. And I know sometimes it's like, oh, why, but it's usually because they just associate going back to sleep with that kind of help. So whatever you offer your baby at bedtime, that's what they will need in order to go back in between when they wake at night. It is normal that they can give you by nature longer stretches in the first half of the night than in the end of the night. It has to do with human melatonin, so their sleep pressure. Because sleep pressure is really high in the first half of the night, they tend to give us longer stretches, and they tend to also settle quicker. So if you have to rock them back to sleep, pat or feed them back to sleep, it's usually a quicker session than at like 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. And the biggest struggles happen between 4 and 6 a.m. when human melatonin is really getting low. And I always try to explain it as with a big glass of water. This is full to the brim at bedtime, right? Which means it makes things the most easy. Not easy, but the most easy. And obviously, the more and more the night goes on, it fades out, it leaves their body, and the more they struggle. So keep in mind, they can connect sleep cycles in the first half of the night better because they have a lot of sleep pressure. And the more it fades, the more they struggle. I have a lot of moms that now question themselves, like, especially if they use feedings to get them back to sleep. And that's a normal thing. My light just turned off. Whatever. So usually what happens is moms question themselves, why is my baby wanting to feed back to sleep at night? And they take the whole bottle, let's say the whole 6 ounce, or they feed super long on the breast. They're probably hungry, right? And you're not fully wrong, but let's go back to our newborns here. What happens when you have your baby? You get your baby, you latch them on, right? Sucking is the most soothing skill they have from the second they're out of our bodies. And usually what we do is when they're really newborns, we tend to give them a pacifier or the breast or a bottle when they're really, really upset, right? Because usually they have still very short wake windows. We need to make sure they get those feedings. And like we know, sucking is the most soothing skill they have. So don't feel like you did anything wrong. Done it with both of my kids is very normal. It has to do with them wanting to suck themselves back to drowsiness, back to like being calm. It's not necessarily that they need 6 to 8 ounces or they're chugging the whole bottle or they're like feeding for 45 minutes. It has to do with them wanting to suck themselves back to a calm state and then drifting off to sleep. So mostly coaches say try to eliminate those feedings, right? And I always say, look at your baby. Don't just be like, okay, that like we have to get rid of everything. Look at your baby. There are some certain criteria you need to be aware of in order to even get to the point of like making that weaning process successful. So, with that being said, you cannot wean your baby if they're not even at 12 pounds. That should be, a must. If your baby doesn't even have 12 pounds, don't consider weaning those feeds at night. Also, if your child has a reverse cycle at night. So, reverse cycles are if your baby feeds very frequent, almost cluster feeds at night, but they have minimal intake during the day. That means your child is getting most of the calories in during the night and they're just snacking during the day because their bodies know, like, oh, we get everything in overnight. We don't need to eat that much during the day. For those parents, if that's your pattern, make sure you keep 1 or 2 set feedings until you see a little bit of a switch during the daytime. So you want to make sure you're not taking everything away from them because that can also lead to dehydration and it's just really brutal, especially if they're really small. Once you see that they're actually increasing their milk intake during the day, that's when you can go down to 1 set feeding a night, and then it's totally up to you. I always ask my parents, do you want to get rid of their feed, or do you still feel like I want to have a night feeding? And are you and baby even ready? I do have to say, moving away from a demand feeding schedule, especially at night, helps them to not have that expectation to needing the breast or the bottle to go back to sleep. But like I said, it depends on so many factors. And if you say you want to keep a feed, that is totally okay. And that doesn't mean that you cannot be successful. Jack, could you maybe look at my light? My light turned off. So let's say you want to keep a feeding. We will talk about this a little bit later, and I will tell you guys, thank you. I will tell you guys exactly how to do that.